You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I have to start with the battle for the NFC least. Washington and the Giants entered yesterday tied for first place in the NFC least. By virtue of the Giants beating Washington in their two matchups this year, the Giants had the tiebreaker. Fast forward to last night, the Giants have fallen out of first place. They got destroyed by the Cardinals, 26-7, and Washington beat the Niners like I said they would, 23-15. It is amazing to look at all the Giants fans on Twitter screaming about Jason Garrett, screaming about Daniel Jones, screaming about the offensive line. Meanwhile, a week ago, they were carrying on like they had just won the Super Bowl. Look, I gave them their due last week. They beat a really, really, really good Seahawks team. But what got lost in that was that Washington won their game too. They ended the Steelers' quest for an undefeated season. I don't want to say that Washington's win negated the Giants' win, but in terms of looking at the standings, it did. Now with 3 games left to go, the Giants are a game behind Washington for first place in the NFC least. Let's take a look at their games. They have the Browns on Sunday night. That got flexed. So we'll see the Giants take on the Browns in prime time. Should be a very good game. I'll be watching it. Then they have the Ravens. And then they finish the season against the Cowboys. The only game that I could really see them winning is the Cowboys game. They're not going to beat the Browns and they're not going to beat the Ravens. They're not as good as those teams. Meanwhile, you look at Washington, they have the Seahawks. If the Giants can beat the Seahawks, Washington can beat the Seahawks. I'm not saying they will, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Then they have the Panthers, and then they finish the season against the Eagles. I can make a real argument that Washington's going to finish the season on a 7-game winning streak. They're 4-1 in their last 5. They've won their last 4 games. If they win out from here on out, well, they'll finish the season on a 7-game winning streak. It's very possible. We can laugh about it all we want because they don't have a name. Because Dan Snyder's the owner, because they don't have a long-term quarterback. The simple fact is, Ron Rivera is probably the coach of the year. Maybe Stefanski. Maybe Frank Reich. Maybe Brian Flores. maybe Cliff Kingsbury, but Rivera's up there. Like I said, a lot of Giants fans got on the offensive line and the play calling of Jason Garrett. And I'm not saying that the offensive line played well. They allowed Hassan Reddick to have one of the greatest games in NFL history. I'm not kidding. This guy had 5 sacks and 3 forced fumbles yesterday. That is one of the greatest games in NFL history for a defensive player. It just is. And Jason Garrett didn't call a great game. But there's only so much you can do with Daniel Jones as your quarterback. The reality is, even if Dave Gettleman stays, I understand that he has a lot invested in Daniel Jones, but pride comes before the fall. You've got to move on from him. Daniel Jones is not the long-term answer for the New York Giants. The reality is, he keeps turning the ball over at an unforgivable rate. In addition to being sacked 6 times, the guy put the ball on the ground 3 times. He lost one of those fumbles. Even though he only lost one of them, you've got to stop putting the ball on the ground. This isn't hot potato we're playing. We're playing football here. Some of those sacks were the result of Jones just holding onto the ball too long, not being able to move around. He did not do a good job using his legs. We all know Jones can run. He didn't do that yesterday. You want to tell me he's still hurt? He's not at 100%? Hey, I get that. I'm not saying you're wrong. But how many quarterbacks play through pain? This is the second year that he's missed a game because of injury. Should Colt McCoy have started? Were you going to catch lightning in a bottle twice? I understand you beat the Seahawks with him, but be realistic. Don't you think Daniel Jones gives you a better chance of winning than Colt McCoy? And if Jones doesn't, why is he starting? The reality is, this is what happens when you have Daniel Jones as your quarterback. He cannot win a big game. He is not a good quarterback. I hope you enjoy being in first place, Giants fans, because I don't think you're getting back there. You're not going to beat the Browns. You're not as good as them. You're not going to beat the Ravens. You're not as good as them. Can you beat the Cowboys? Absolutely. But if Washington wins just one more game, whether it's against the Panthers or Eagles, I don't think they're beating the Seahawks. So if they beat the Panthers and or the Eagles, that's it. Forget about it. Joe Judge has earned another year, despite the fact that the special teams is absolutely dreadful and Joe Judge is a former special teams coordinator. You'd think that would be something that he'd get instilled to his team, the importance of special teams. Evidently not. But he is staying. The fact that the Giants have been in the hunt this long means he's staying. The 4-game win streak, he's staying. Dave Gettleman is probably staying. The moves he made on defense worked. The issue with the Giants is their quarterback. He has regressed tremendously this year. Some people are going to blame Jason Garrett for that. I don't think that's the case. I think it's that NFL defenses got a lot of tape on him, and they learned how to defend him. This guy has only thrown 8 touchdowns this year. You know how many interceptions he's thrown? 9. You know how many times he's put the ball on the ground? 10. You know how many times he's lost those fumbles? 5. There's only so much that coaching can do. The reality is this guy just doesn't have what it takes to be an NFL quarterback. And until the Giants move on from him, they're doomed to fail. I'm not saying the offensive line played well. It didn't. It gave up 8 sacks. I'm not saying that Jason Garrett called a great game. He didn't. But there's only so much that anyone could do with Daniel Jones as their quarterback. He does not have what it takes to succeed in this league. As for Washington, you've got to give their defense credit. Even though they were going up against a banged-up Niners team, they still played really well. They sacked Nick Mullins 4 times. Outside of letting Brandon Ayuk get 10 catches for 119 yards, Washington's defense didn't let the Niners get anything going. Mullins was okay. He wasn't great. Raheem Mostert had 14 carries for 65 yards. That's just over 4.5 yards per carry. But Kyle Shanahan wanted to use Jeff Wilson also for some stupid reason. I'm not the biggest Kyle Shanahan fan in the world, I'll tell you that. I think he's a little overrated. I understand that the Niners made the Super Bowl last year. I'm not saying he's bad or anything, but he gets a reputation as being like an elite offensive mind. He's not. He's very, very good. He's not elite. The one thing that I did like seeing for Washington was Dwayne Haskins. I still like Haskins. I'll tell you what, I have more faith that he could save him than I do Sam Darnold. Alex Smith got hurt, and even in this game, he wasn't that good. He completed just 8 of his 19 passes for 57 yards, and he threw an interception. Haskins came in and wasn't great or anything. Completed 7 of his 12 passes for 51 yards. But he helped Washington win this game. A big game. I'll tell you, if Dwayne Haskins starts against the Panthers and the Eagles, that doesn't scare me. If I'm a Washington fan, that doesn't scare me. I like Haskins. I really do. I think it's ridiculous to give up on a quarterback after not even a full year starting in the NFL. Haskins has played in just 14 games in the NFL. Would you rather start Alex Smith if you were Ron Rivera? Yes, no question. But I don't think Haskins will be terrible. The reality is he only had 1 bad game this year, and that was against the Browns. He was solid against the Eagles. He was okay against the Cardinals, not great, not terrible. He wasn't good against the Browns, but against the Ravens, he threw for over 300 yards. I think you can win with Haskins. Do you want him as your long-term franchise quarterback? That remains to be seen. There certainly are better options, but I wouldn't give up on Haskins yet at all. I thought Haskins was the best quarterback in the 2019 draft. It would be ridiculous for me to give up on him now. Moving on now to Chiefs-Dolphins. And this was a really impressive win for the Chiefs. Not just because they beat a good Dolphins team. Not because they scored in basically every way imaginable. Mahomes threw a touchdown, Tyreek Hill ran for a touchdown, Mecole Hardman had a punt return for a touchdown, Chris Jones sacked Tua in the end zone for a safety, Harrison Butker also kicked a field goal. No, the reason why this was an impressive win for the Chiefs is because they were able to win this game with Patrick Mahomes not playing like Mahomes. Every quarterback is gonna have a day where he's not at 100%. And Mahomes would be the first person to tell you he didn't play great yesterday. It's kind of funny when you stop and think about it. He threw for just under 400 yards, and he threw 2 touchdowns, and we're saying that he didn't play well. But it's true, he threw 3 interceptions. For some reason, he has trouble going up against Brian Flores. It's bizarre. The Dolphins had the Chiefs reeling a little bit. They were up 10-0. Mahomes couldn't get anything going. And then the Chiefs decided that they actually wanted to win this game. They scored 30 unanswered points. Now, they let the Dolphins back into it. They got outscored 17-3 in the fourth quarter. The final score was 33-27. Nothing to be ashamed of if you're a Dolphins fan. You played the Chiefs really tough. This was the best you could hope for. But this is what the Chiefs do. They just play well with their backs against the wall. Remember, they were down big to the Texans in the divisional round last year. They were down to the Titans in the conference title game. They were down to the Niners in the Super Bowl. They came back. They won all those games. The fact that the Chiefs were able to win this game, being down double digits again, and with their quarterback not playing the best he's ever played, still good. Still really good. But not great. You do expect Mahomes to be better than that. The fact that the Chiefs were able to win this game is a testament to their dominance. Eric Bieniemy can't get to the Jets soon enough. He is my A1 choice for our next Jets head coach. Moving on now to Vikings-Buccaneers. A very, very important game with the Cardinals winning yesterday and the Vikings losing. The Cardinals are now a game up on the Vikings and Bears for the final NFC wildcard spot. And I'll tell you, the way the Vikings played, they didn't deserve to win. You can't miss 4 kicks and expect to win. Was that the sole reason that the Vikings lost yesterday? Absolutely not, but it didn't help. Bailey missed 3 field goal tries. He missed the PAT. He's missed 7 kicks in his last 2 games. He almost blew the game against the Jaguars. The reality is, once upon a time, Dan Bailey was a really good kicker. He made a Pro Bowl in 2015. He led the NFL in field goal percentage that year. This guy came into the NFL in 2011. The first time he missed an extra point was 2017. He was really good once upon a time, but now, forget about it. You've got to move on from him if you're the Vikings. I don't know what was up with these kickers yesterday. A lot of them missed kicks. Jake Elliott missed one of the easiest field goals you'll ever attempt in your life. Sergio Castillo was dreadful for the Jets, then again everyone was. Dan Bailey missed all his kicks. I mean, something's in the water. The Vikings are going to have to move on from Bailey. It's just that simple. This is a team that's been plagued with kicking issues. Remember Blair Walsh? They tried Daniel Carlson. That didn't work. You can't let Bailey kick for you anymore. You're fighting for a playoff spot. You're on the outside looking in. If I'm the Vikings, I'm trying out kickers night and day. Because you can't subject your fans to watching Dan Bailey anymore. He just doesn't have it anymore. He should be able to produce. He's not that old. He's only 32. That's young for a kicker. But for whatever reason, he doesn't have it. I mean, he was good this year up until the Jaguars game. I understand that may complicate matters a little bit, but there's no excuse to do what Bailey's done recently. He's missed 7 kicks in his last 2 games. That's inexcusable. I don't care what you did before. You've got to move on from Dan Bailey if you're the Vikings. I don't care who you bring in to replace him. Moving on now to Saints-Eagles, a game that I got incredibly wrong. I thought the Saints were going to steamroll the Eagles. Jalen Hurts' first start against this great Saints team. A team that has a real chance of representing the NFC in the Super Bowl. No way the Eagles are winning that game, right? Well, that's why I went 2-1 this week. You've got to give Jalen Hurts a ton of credit. He played really well. Completed 17 of his 30 passes for 167 yards. He also threw a touchdown pass to Alshon Jeffrey, Jeffrey's only catch of the game. But in addition to that, he was the Eagles' best runner yesterday. If you take the 82-yard run by Miles Sanders out of the equation, how great was Sanders? Hurts had 18 carries for 106 yards. The Saints just looked utterly confused on defense. This is one of the best defenses in the NFL. And they couldn't stop a quarterback who was making his first NFL start. That is a bad look for the Saints. I mean, I've said before that Carson Wentz isn't the issue with the Eagles as much as it is their offensive line. But after seeing what Hurts did yesterday, I need to reevaluate that. Maybe it is all on Wentz. It's not all on Peterson. Doug Peterson called a really good game yesterday. I wouldn't mind him on the Jets. More than anything, what Hurts did was give the Eagles a shot in the arm. He did give the team a spark that, hey, we're still in this thing. It's still possible. The Eagles are only a game and a half behind Washington for first place in the NFC least. I don't think it's going to happen, but anything's possible. This is 2020 after all. If Hurts plays well in the next 3 games, does that save Peterson's job? I mean, I do think they need to beef up the offensive line a little bit. Get some younger players in there. And for God's sake, bring in some talented wide receivers. But if Hurts balls out to end the season, it wouldn't surprise me if the Eagles said, you know what, we're going to run it back with Jalen Hurts. You got to give Hurts credit. He came into an impossible situation. No one liked that pick. No one thought he was going to play. Carson Wentz struggles. Jalen Hurts' first start in the NFL is against the New Orleans Saints, one of the best defenses in the NFL. He somehow finds a way to win. I mean, he's got to do it again, but that was a really impressive win. Give Hurts and Peterson a ton of credit. Alright, now I'll give you some college football Valk talk. And I'll start with Army-Navy. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It was a boring game. Like I said, this is a bad Navy team. Diego Fagot did not play well. I understand that he left the game early, but he only had 3 tackles. He's got to do better than that. He's Navy's best player. But again, this was just an incredibly boring game. How many times can you watch the quarterback run the ball and not even think about throwing it? Same thing for Army. I don't know what the record is for least number of passes thrown in an FBS game, but both teams combined for only 8 pass attempts. Tyler Tyler, who, give him credit, he got the win, only threw 1 pass the whole game. It was a 28-yard completion to the running back, Tyrell Robinson. How many times can you watch that before you want to bang your head against a wall? I mean, give Army credit. They're a good team this year. They went 8-2. But this was just a boring game. Navy just couldn't get anything going. 15-0 games really aren't that exciting, especially when you know that one of those teams has no chance of doing anything. Even that drive in the third quarter where Army had the goal line stand, you had to know that Navy wasn't going to punch it in there. Were you watching the game? I mean, come on. Bad game. Boring game. Really didn't like it. I'll tell you which game I did like. LSU, Florida. Maybe the biggest upset of the year. This is a bad LSU team. The Tigers entered this game with a 3-5 record. Florida was 8-1. Were they going to make the CFP? Probably not. But if they were, they had to win this game. They had to finish the season with just 1 loss. Now forget about it. Florida's done. There is no way that a 2-loss Florida team gets in over A&M, Cincinnati, maybe a team like USC or Coastal Carolina, Florida's done. It's just that simple. And I'll tell you why. Marco Wilson, a redshirt junior. A guy who's had a good season for Florida. He's been a very good defensive back for the Gators. Commits one of the most asinine penalties you'll ever see. The guy threw a shoe of an LSU player. What are you thinking, man? Put the shoe down! If you were watching that game as a Florida fan, forget throwing Wilson's shoe, you wanted to throw him. You wanted to throw him out of the program. That is one of the stupidest things you will ever see on a football field. If it's a freshman, I can understand it. The guy's still immature. This is a redshirt junior we're talking about. A guy who could go into the NFL. If he wants to declare for the draft, he can. Now, who's going to touch him? Let me tell you, this kid is meat. At practice, I hope that Dan Mullen reamed him out. And I hope he reamed him out in front of everyone. I'd want Wilson to feel like dirt. Because he cost everyone a possible CFP berth. I mean, you gotta give LSU credit. They played great. Max Johnson, Brad Johnson's nephew, in the biggest game of his life, was fantastic. He completed 21 of his 36 passes. He threw for 239 yards. He had 3 touchdowns. I liked how Johnson got Kayshon Boutte involved. He had 5 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown. This was a really impressive win for him and the Tigers. But the best player for LSU was their kicker. Cade York may have just carved his name in stone as someone who's going to be drafted by an NFL team. When you kick a 57-yard field goal to win the game for your team with the entire college football world watching, and you beat a really good Florida team to boot, next year, kid, you're going to be drafted by an NFL team. Keep it up. You're doing great. Florida had a chance at the end. Evan McPherson looked sick after he missed that field goal, but it wasn't his fault. It was on Marco Wilson. Hopefully, for Wilson's sake, he redeems himself with a great performance against Alabama in the SEC title game. But I wouldn't count on it. If I'm Mullen, I may bench him. Send a message. You can't do that and play. That is inexcusable. I hope Wilson didn't get any sleep on Saturday. If I was him, I'd lay awake all night thinking about how I just screwed my team over. Shame on him. Moving on now to Georgia, Missouri. And this was a blowout by Georgia. They creamed Missouri. Connor Bazelak couldn't get anything going. Neither could their best player, Larry Roundtree. JT Daniels was fantastic. Completed 16 of his 27 passes for just under 300 yards. He also threw 3 touchdowns. That may have been his best game. in his college career. That's how dominant he was. I mean, this is a guy who threw for over 400 yards and 4 touchdowns against Mississippi State a few weeks ago. But Mississippi State isn't that good. You watch Daniels on Saturday, he was dominant. It's kind of an interesting hypothetical. How good would Georgia be if Stetson Bennett didn't open the season as their starter? Would they have beaten Alabama? Would they have beaten Florida? I don't know. It would have been close. Watch out for JT Daniels next year. Other than Daniels, though, Zamir White had over 120 rushing yards. Daijun Edwards had over 100 rushing yards. Kenny McIntosh contributed also. So did James Cook. George Pickens had 5 catches for 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. The reality is, while this is a good Missouri team, this isn't a great Missouri team. They just can't hang with the big boys. Maybe down the line they'll be able to, but not right now. Moving on now to UNC versus the U. Wow. That's the only thing I can say. Just wow. We all knew that Javonte Williams and Michael Carter were a really good running back duo. But there's no excuse for them to have the stat line that they had. Carter had 24 carries for 308 yards and 2 touchdowns. Williams had 23 carries for 236 yards and 3 touchdowns. Sam Howell had one of the easiest games of his life. All he had to do was hand the ball off. And if he didn't do that, he just got it to Dyami Brown. Miami gave up 778 yards in this game. That is a school record. This is a Miami team that if they had won, could have maybe snuck in to the CFP if a bunch of things had broken their way. Now, obviously, there's no chance of that. Offensively, they weren't bad. De'Ara King did his thing. Brevin Jordan and Mike Harley had good games. But Miami on Saturday couldn't stop Bellevue Hospital's team, let alone this really talented UNC team. They do have talented players. Williams and Carter are talented. Sam Howell's really talented. Dyami Brown is very talented. But there's no excuse for this Miami defense that up until this point was pretty good to allow Williams and Carter to do what they did. Manny Diaz had to be sick. Miami's had some bad games. They were a bad program for a long time. They used to give away tickets at Burger King's. I'm not kidding. That game yesterday may have been the worst game in the history of the program. Alright, now I'll give you some MLB Valk talk. And a long-rumored contract has come to fruition. James McCann is a Met. They signed him to a 4-year deal worth a little over $40 million. We don't know how much exactly, but it is going to be 4 years at just a little over 40 mil. James McCann was the second best catcher on the free agent market. With the Tigers, he did nothing. Then he went to the White Sox and looked like the second coming of Ray Schalk. In 2019, he made the All-Star team. He had .273 with 18 homers and 60 RBIs. Last year, he had .289 with 7 homers and 15 RBIs. $10 million a year for him, or just about, is more than fair. That is a reasonable contract. And if you look at this deal in a bubble, it makes perfect sense for the Mets. They needed a catcher, and they got a really good one. Here's what I don't like about it. The Mets have a new owner, Steve Cohen. The guy has more money than God. He's the richest owner in Major League Baseball. Why didn't he sign Real Muto? There is no question that JT Real Muto is better than James McCann. That's just fact. You remember all those games when he was a Marlin and a Philly that he killed the Mets? Yeah, this guy's really talented. This is a good move for the Mets. It makes sense to bring in McCann, but someone needs to answer for why JT Real Muto wasn't signed by the Mets. Don't give me the he wanted too much money argument. That doesn't work for me. No. This guy is one of the best free agents available. He is the best catcher in all of baseball. The Mets have an owner with a boatload of money at his disposal. There is no reason that JT Real Muto shouldn't be a New York Met. You want to tell me it's unfair to look at this deal through the prism of Real Muto? I have to evaluate McCann for McCann? Again, if I'm looking at it in a bubble, it does make sense. James McCann will be a fine Met. But when you have the opportunity to get the best catcher in Major League Baseball, and you've had a glaring hole at catcher for an incredibly long time, you've got to go after the best of the best. Real Muto should be a Met. Instead, James McCann is a Met. That should leave a bad taste in your mouth as a Mets fan. But what shouldn't leave a bad taste in your mouth is Jared Porter being your GM. He signed a 4-year deal, and this is a good move for the Mets. Porter is well respected throughout league circles. It seems like he's able to toe the line between old school and new school baseball. He was a scout for a while. Then he was a senior vice president and assistant GM for the Diamondbacks. A lot of people throughout baseball really like him. This is a good move for the Mets. Porter has been long overdue for an MLB GM position. It's going to be interesting to see who ultimately calls the shots. Will it be Sandy Alderson, or will it be Porter? What I think could happen is that Sandy Alderson, in a year or two, could fade away. Realize, he's had health concerns in the past. He's 73 years old. It's possible that he says to Porter, I'm going to call the shots for a year or two. You're going to help me. But then I'm going to take a step back and you're going to run this thing. There's nothing wrong with that from a Mets perspective. I'm a little surprised Porter went along with it, but he was staring an MLB GM job in the face, and all he has to do is wait a year or two to have full autonomy. I don't think Porter's going to have full autonomy right now. Alderson is still there. I would like to know what the power structure is going to be for the Mets for now and for the future. But this is a good move for the Mets. They got a really smart guy to be their GM. Moving on now to the Rangers, bringing in David Dahl for 1 year at about $3 million. And this is a good move for the Rangers. They had a hole in the outfield with them non-tendering Danny Santana. Dahl had a bad year last season. He hit 183 with no homers and 9 RBIs. But the year before, he was an all-star. He hit 302 with 15 homers and 61 RBIs. The key for him is going to be staying healthy. He's had injury concerns his whole career. It's a worthwhile gamble for the Rangers. Best case scenario, he's an all-star again. That wouldn't surprise me if that happened. I like Dahl. I think he has a ton of talent. Very good contact hitter. Worst comes to worst, though, he gets hurt again, and last year's 183 average is his new normal. Ultimately, though, I do think Dahl will play in over 100 games. I think he'll hit 280. I like Dahl. I do think he's a bounce-back candidate for next year. This move makes a ton of sense. Moving on now to the Red Sox, signing Hunter Renfroe for 1 year at $3.1 million. And this makes sense for the Red Sox. Jackie Bradley Jr. is a free agent. I don't think the Red Sox are going to bring him back, even though he had a good season last year. Nothing in his past shows that he's going to do that long term. Last year he had 283 with 7 homers and 22 RBIs. He's a career 239 hitter. He plays great defense, but you can do a lot better than Jackie Bradley Jr. Renfroe had a bad season last year. He hit 156 with 8 homers and 22 RBIs, and he did nothing in the playoffs. He hit just 174. He did get 7 RBIs, though. I do like that. But still, 174 average. It's hard for me to overlook that. Renfroe's a guy who, if he stays healthy and plays every day, can get 35 home runs. Easy. At Fenway, he's going to rake. 40 home runs isn't out of the question, to tell you the truth. They're going to move Verdugo to center and put Renfroe in right. They added a really good power bat here. He's never hit for a great average. Excluding last season, his career batting average was .235. That's what you're going to get from Renfroe. A .220 to .250 average with a ton of power. I'll take it. I can live with that. If Renfroe hits a bunch of home runs, which again, I think he's going to do at Fenway, I can overlook the bad average. This is a good move for the Red Sox. Renfroe is another bounce-back candidate. The last story that I want to talk about concerns my beloved New York Islanders. The Islanders traded quote-unquote future considerations, whatever the hell that is, to the Red Wings for Dmytro Timashov. Firstly, let me just say that the Islanders' PR team should be ashamed of themselves because in their official press release announcing this trade, they misspelled his name. He spells his first name Dmytro. The genius running the PR team spelled it Dimytro. You don't have hockey reference where you are, buddy? You don't have Hockey DB or ESPN or Yahoo Sports? No? Idiot. But in all seriousness, this is a solid move for the Islanders. They did need depth on the wing. Matt Martin is still a free agent, and I'd be very surprised if the Islanders brought him back. I like Kiefer Bellows, but he did have some moments where you just shook your head. Michael DeCall is a bust. Andrew Ladd has no chance. Ross Johnston's a goon. The Islanders brought in Austin Czarnik, but to add a little more competition made a ton of sense. Timashov only has last year under his belt. In 44 games last year for the Maple Leafs and Red Wings, he had 9 points, all with the Leafs. Lou Lamoriello did not draft him with the Leafs, but he was there in their minor league system. So Lamoriello knows him. It makes sense to bring him in. Worst case scenario, he's organizational depth in Bridgeport. Best case scenario, he's a fourth-line left winger. This move makes sense for the Islanders. I don't mind it at all. Tomorrow, you're going to get the interview that I did with Jesse Washington, the co-author of John Thompson's autobiography, I Came as a Shadow. I had a great time talking to him. He's a really nice guy. I'm also going to break down Ravens-Browns, along with any other sports news that breaks. Until then, I am Jacob Valk saying I hate the minor leagues. I'd rather go out to lunch with my ex-wife's attorney than be in the minors.